The nurse peeled my frozen jacket off like she was unwrapping something that had been left outside too long. I was shaking so hard the gurney rattled beneath me, and she put one hand on my shoulder and pressed down firm, the way you'd steady a table with a wobbly leg. Sandra Kowalski, can you tell me what happened?" I opened my mouth and nothing came out. Not because I didn't have words, I had plenty, but my jaw was locked so tight from the cold that I couldn't separate my teeth. My whole body felt like it belonged to someone else, someone who had left it out on a porch in northern Minnesota in January and forgotten to bring it back inside. My core temperature was 89.6. The nurse, a woman named Bridget with short red hair and hands that moved like they'd unwrapped 1,000 frozen people before me, told me later that another 20 minutes out there and my organs would have started shutting down one by one. Like lights going off in a house nobody lives in anymore. First the porch light, then the kitchen, then the upstairs bedroom, and then the whole place goes dark and nobody's coming to flip the breaker. I was 53 years old, barefoot in a hospital gown at St. Luke's in Duluth, Minnesota, and the only thing I had managed to grab on my way out the door was a manila folder full of lab results that didn't belong to me. Because I was never sick. My sister made sure everyone thought I was. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Way ahead. It was a Thursday. I know because the recycling bins were out on every curb I walked past, and in our neighborhood, recycling goes out Wednesday night for Thursday morning pickup. Thursday, January 23rd. The clock on the stove read 11:47 when my husband threw my boots at the front door. Not handed them, not set them by the mat. Henry Kowalski picked up my winter boots and hurled them at the front entrance like they had personally offended him. One hit the doorframe and left a black scuff mark that I guarantee is still there, because Hank has never cleaned a doorframe in his life and he's not about to start. He also grabbed a manila folder from the kitchen counter, the one with the lab results Vivian had brought over 3 days earlier, and hurled it after me. "And take this with you. Take your lies." Hank stood in the doorway with his chest puffed out and his neck veins doing that thing they do when he's made up his mind about something and God himself couldn't change it. Built like a diesel engine. Square, heavy, impossible to move once he decided where he was sitting. And behind him stood my sister Vivian. Arms folded, mouth shut. She didn't say one word. Not wait, not let's talk, not even take a coat. She just stood there in my living room, in my house, wearing the reading glasses she borrowed from me 4 months ago and never returned. And watched me walk out into the coldest night Duluth had seen since February of 2019. Get out of my house. I'm not going to watch you lie to me about dying the way Grandma lied to everyone. Now, there's a lot to unpack in that sentence, honey, and we are going to get to every last syllable. But first, let me tell you about the walk. I didn't have my car keys. They were on the hook by the back door inside, and I was not about to go back in there and ask for them, like some kind of guest in my own home. So I walked. London Road, eastbound, in January air that felt like someone was throwing glass at my face. The wind off Lake Superior didn't just blow past you, it went through you. Through your clothes, through your skin, through whatever dignity you had left. I was wearing a North Shore timber hoodie, flannel pajama pants, and the boots Hank had thrown. No coat, no phone that was charging on the kitchen counter, but I had that manila folder. Scooped it off the front steps without thinking, shoved it under my hoodie against my stomach. Instinct, maybe, or stubbornness. The Kowalski women have never been short on either. I made it about 1.5 miles before my legs started doing something I'd never felt. They weren't tired, they were confused. Like my muscles received instructions in a language they no longer understood. That's what happens when your core temperature drops below 95 degrees. Your brain starts shutting down departments it considers non-essential. Apparently, walking is one of the first to go, right after dignity and right before hope. Headlights came from behind. A big county plow truck, orange and white. It pulled over and the driver cracked his window 2 inches. "Ma'am, you trying to freeze to death out here?" "I honestly don't have an answer for that right now, sir." His name was Earl Gustafson, 63, retired, working seasonal because sitting home watching the History Channel was, as he put it, making him dumber by the hour. He drove me to St. Luke's. Didn't ask too many questions. Just turned the heat to full blast and let me shake in his passenger seat while the vents blew air that felt like mercy. The emergency room team measured my temperature at 89.6. Bridget cut my hoodie off with shears that looked like they belonged in a garden shed. She wrapped me in heated blankets that smelled like industrial detergent and something vaguely like hope. She put an IV in my left arm because my right arm wouldn't cooperate, and she kept saying my name like she was trying to keep me tethered to the world. Sandra, stay with me, Sandra. I wanted to tell her nobody calls me Sandra except my mother, and my mother had been dead since July, but my jaw still wouldn't unlock. So I lay there, rattling on that gurney, holding a manila folder full of fake lab results against my chest like it was the last thing keeping me alive. And, in a way, it was. Officer Dan Pelletier from St. Louis County showed up around 2 in the morning. Young, maybe 32, with a no-nonsense crew cut and a clipboard that had seen better days. He also had a Garfield thermos tucked under his arm, which I found strangely comforting. Any man who drinks coffee from a Garfield thermos at 2 in the morning has not entirely given up on joy. He took my statement, asked if I wanted to press charges. I said, "For what? Being married to an idiot?" He didn't laugh. He wrote something down. Then he called Hank. I didn't ask him to. I didn't want him to. But Deputy Pelletier made the call anyway because, as he explained with the kind of patience you use on someone who's been half frozen and isn't thinking clearly, it was standard procedure when a spouse is involved in an incident report. Standard procedure. Like what happened to me was just another Wednesday night in northern Minnesota. Except it was Thursday, and there was nothing standard about any of it. Hank showed up just before 2:30. I know because I was watching the clock on the wall, one of those institutional clocks with the second hand that ticks so loud you can hear your life going by one click at a time. He walked into the emergency room bay, saw the IV in my arm, the heated blankets piled on me like I was something fragile that needed protecting, the deputy with his clipboard, and Bridget, who was explaining hypothermia stages to a younger nurse like it was a Tuesday afternoon lecture. Hank went white. Not pale, white, like someone had pulled a plug at the bottom of his boots and drained every drop of color out of him from the feet up. He stood in the doorway of that curtained bay, and his mouth opened, and for the first time in 28 years of marriage, Henry Kowalski had absolutely nothing to say. Good. Now he knew how it felt. His hands were shaking, not from the cold. Hank had driven here in his heated truck, wearing his Carhartt jacket and his lined work gloves. His hands were shaking because he was looking at his wife wrapped in hospital blankets with a core temperature that was 6 degrees away from organ failure, and somewhere in that diesel engine brain of his, a gear had finally turned. He opened his mouth again, closed it, opened it. He looked like a man trying to start a sentence in a language he'd never learned. The deputy stepped forward and said something to him quietly that I couldn't hear. Hank nodded. He didn't come closer. He didn't touch me. He just stood there at the foot of the gurney, staring at the IV line like it was a fuse he didn't know how to defuse. I stared right back at him. My jaw had finally loosened enough to speak, but I chose not to. Let him stand there. Let him marinate in it. Let him feel 1/10 of what I felt walking London Road in pajama pants while the wind off Superior tried to separate my soul from my skeleton. Bridget asked him if he wanted to sit down. He shook his head. She asked again. He shook his head again. Then his knees buckled slightly, just a fraction, and he grabbed the rail of the gurney to steady himself. The gurney rolled an inch. Bridget caught it. "Sir, I need you to sit down before I have 2 patients instead of 1. He sat in the plastic chair by the wall, the one that squeaked every time you shifted your weight. He sat there for 45 minutes without saying a single word, and every time that chair squeaked, I thought, good, now you know what silence sounds like when it's the only thing left between 2 people. But I'm getting way ahead of myself. Way ahead. None of this makes any sense. Not the hospital, not the boots at the door, not my sister standing in my living room wearing my glasses while my husband threw me out of my own home. None of it makes sense unless I take you back to the beginning. And the beginning isn't the storm. The beginning is a cabin on Lake Superior and the 2 sisters who were supposed to share it. See, honey, I grew up spending every summer of my life at a cabin near 2 harbors, about 30 miles north of Duluth on the shore of the biggest, coldest, most beautiful lake you've ever seen. My mother, Irene Kowalski, bought that cabin with my father in 1978. 5 acres of birch and pine trees, a gravel driveway that crunched under your tires like it was announcing your arrival, and a porch that looked out over the water so wide and so blue that on a clear day you couldn't tell where the lake ended and the sky began. Mama used to sit on that porch every evening in her wooden rocking chair, knitting sweaters nobody asked for and everybody wore. She'd sit there until the mosquitoes got too bold or the sunset ran out, whichever came first. The cabin smelled like cedar and wool and wood smoke, and underneath all of that, something else. Something that was just Mama. Like lemon soap and strong coffee, and the particular warmth of a woman who believed that every problem in the world could be solved with a good meal and a firm talking to. Vivian and I spent every July and August in that cabin, from the time we were small enough to fit in the same sleeping bag. We caught fireflies in mason jars. We swam in water so cold it made your bones ache. We sat at the pine table inside and did jigsaw puzzles while rain hammered the tin roof so loud you had to shout to be heard. That cabin was the only place in the world where everything made sense. And when Mama died last July, she left it to both of us, 50-50. The cabin, the 5 acres, the porch, the rocking chair, the pine table, all of it. And that's when everything stopped making sense, because my sister Vivian decided she wanted more than her half. She wanted mine too. And she was willing to destroy my marriage, my health, my reputation, and very nearly my life to get it. But before I tell you what Vivian did, you need to understand who these people are. You need to understand who Hank is and why he broke the way he did. You need to understand who Vivian is, and how a woman I loved with my whole chest turned into someone I didn't recognize. And you need to understand me, because I was not blameless in this. I trusted too easily. I loved too blindly. And I handed my sister every weapon she ever used against me, one coffee conversation at a time. So let me start where it really started, with a man, a church, and a potluck reception that gave 3 people heartburn. Hank Kowalski married me in June of 1996 at Bethany Lutheran Church on 3rd Avenue in Duluth. And if you're picturing some big fancy wedding with a string quartet and a champagne fountain, I need you to adjust your expectations immediately. We had 62 guests, a potluck reception in the church basement, and my Aunt Harriet brought a hot dish that she swore was her famous tater tot casserole, but tasted like someone had described tater tot casserole to a woman who'd never eaten one, and she'd done her best from the description. 3 people got heartburn. One of them was the pastor. Hank wore a suit he'd borrowed from his cousin Dale, who was 2 inches shorter and 10 pounds lighter, so the jacket sleeves stopped just past his wrists, and the buttons across the chest looked like they were holding on for dear life. He stood at the altar, looking like a man who had been asked to defuse a bomb, and had decided the best strategy was to stand very still and hope it didn't go off. That was Hank. Every emotion he ever had, he treated like a suspicious package. Don't touch it. Don't open it. Just stand back and wait for it to go away on its own. My husband showed affection the way some men show flexibility, rarely, and only under extreme duress. He worked as a diesel mechanic at the Port of Duluth, maintained the engines on ore boats and grain freighters, and came home every night smelling like fuel oil and black coffee. He wasn't romantic. He wasn't cruel. He was just Hank. A man built like a diesel engine himself, square, reliable, and impossible to move once he was set in place. He showed love in the ways that didn't require words. He changed the oil in my car every 3,000 miles without being asked. He shoveled the driveway at 5 in the morning before I woke up so I wouldn't have to walk through snow. He built a bookshelf for Jenna's bedroom when she was 9 and sanded it so smooth you could run your hand across it with your eyes closed and think it was glass. That was Hank's love language. Sandpaper and motor oil, and never once saying the actual words. I met Connie Bjornstad my first week at North Shore Timber Company in September of 2005. She worked in procurement. I worked in bookkeeping. We survived 4 managers, 2 warehouse floods, a mouse infestation that lasted 3 months, and 1 holiday party where the regional vice president tried to sing Bohemian Rhapsody at karaoke and cleared the room in under 90 seconds. We'd been friends for 19 years, and she was the only person on earth who could make me laugh so hard I forgot what I was angry about. That's going to matter later. Our daughter Jenna was 26, lived in Minneapolis, and worked as an elementary school teacher at a place called Sunrise Academy, which sounds like a yoga retreat but is actually a public school in a strip mall next to a tire shop. She worried about me the way I used to worry about my own mother, constantly, from a distance, with guilt. That's also going to matter later. Now I need to tell you about the thing that lived inside Hank like a crack in an engine block, the thing he never talked about, but carried with him every single day. Hank's grandmother, Eleanor Kowalski, died of liver cancer in 1989. She was 61. The cancer had been growing for over a year before anyone knew. Eleanor had symptoms. She had pain, she had fatigue, she had jaundice so bad her eyes turned the color of old newspaper. But she didn't tell anyone. Not her husband, not her children, not her doctor. She hid it the way some people hide debt. Quietly, desperately, until it was too late to do anything but watch. By the time the family found out, it had spread to her bones. She was gone in 9 weeks. Hank was 14 years old. He told me once, only once, that he remembered his grandfather sitting at the kitchen table after the funeral, saying over and over, she knew, and she didn't tell me. I could have helped. I could have done something." Then there was Hank's mother, Dolores, diagnosed with breast cancer in 2017. Caught it early, thank God. Surgery, radiation, remission. She was doing fine. But the 6 months between diagnosis and the all clear nearly broke Hank in half. He lost 14 pounds. He stopped sleeping through the night. He started checking on his mother every single day, calling her at 7 in the morning and 8 at night like clockwork. He never talked about it. Hank would rather rebuild a marine diesel with his bare hands in a blizzard than say the word cancer out loud. But I saw it in him every time someone on TV mentioned tumors or blood tests or survival rates. His whole body would lock up like an engine that seized. Every muscle, every joint, like his bones were bracing for an impact that hadn't come yet but he was sure was on its way. He was terrified. Terrified that someone he loved was going to hide a sickness from him the way Eleanor did. Terrified that he would be the last to know. Terrified that he'd sit at a kitchen table someday and say, she knew, and she didn't tell me. And my sister Vivian knew that about Hank. She knew it the way a locksmith knows the inside of a lock. Every pin, every tumbler, every weak point where the mechanism gives if you apply just the right pressure. Lord, did she know. Now, honey, I need to tell you something about Vivian. And I need you to sit with it for a minute before you judge either one of us, because the truth is, I loved this woman. I loved her the way you love a sister. Blindly, stupidly, with your whole chest and none of your brain. Vivian Ann Kowalski was born 4 years after me at St. Mary's Hospital in Duluth, 6 pounds 11 ounces, with a scream so loud the nurse told my mother she'd either grow up to be an opera singer or a trial lawyer. She became neither, but she had the lungs for both. I braided her hair for school every morning from the time she was 5 until she was 12, and decided she was too old for braids. I taught her to drive in Mama's Oldsmobile Delta 88, the one with the bench seat that made you feel like you were steering a living room down the highway. I held her hand at her wedding to Glenn Drake in 2012, and I held it again at the courthouse 3 years ago when the divorce was finalized, and she walked out into the parking lot and cried so hard she couldn't find her car keys in her purse. I loved her. I need you to understand that before I tell you what she did, because what she did doesn't make sense unless you know that I would have walked through a wall for this woman, and she knew that too. She counted on it. Vivian worked as a laboratory technician at Essentia Health in Duluth, 12 years in the clinical lab, running blood panels, processing specimens, printing lab results. She knew lab reporting systems the way I knew timber inventory, inside and out. Every shortcut, every back door, every code and column and specimen identification number that made the system run. She had careful hands. I always noticed that about her, even when we were kids. The way she'd pick up a glass without making a sound. The way she'd fold a letter into thirds so the creases were perfectly even. In the lab, those careful hands labeled blood vials and sorted specimen trays and printed reports that told people whether they were healthy or whether their world was about to fall apart. She was precise, methodical, patient. Those same hands would later forge my signature on a legal document and steal my half of our mother's property. But I didn't know that yet. Her ex-husband, Glenn Drake, left her 3 years ago. Just packed a bag one Saturday morning, said he was going to get milk, and came back with a divorce attorney instead of a gallon of 2%. I'm not defending Glenn. He handled it like a coward. But I will say this. When the dust settled and the lawyers finished picking the bones, what they found underneath wasn't pretty. Vivian had a mortgage payment of $1,580 a month on a house with a roof that leaked in 3 places. The roof estimate came in at $14,000. She had credit card debt of $41,600, spread across 7 cards, 3 of which Glenn didn't know existed until the divorce proceedings. She had 6 months of backed-up mortgage payments totaling $9,480, and she had a car, a beat-up Chevy Equinox, with a dented passenger door she never fixed that needed a transmission rebuild she couldn't afford. All told, my sister was $67,000 in debt. And that's not counting the daily cost of simply being alive in America, which, as anyone who's bought groceries lately can tell you, is not a cheap hobby. I didn't know any of those numbers at the time. I knew she was struggling. She'd mentioned it in that vague way people mention money problems, like weather they can't control. Things are tight. It's been a rough month. I'll figure it out. I offered to help. She waved me off. Vivian had always been proud the way a cracked dam is proud, holding everything back until the moment it couldn't anymore. I wish I'd pushed harder. I wish I'd sat her down at Mama's kitchen table and said, "Vivian, give me the real numbers." Maybe if I'd known she was drowning in $67,000 of debt, I would have seen what was coming. Maybe I would have recognized the look in her eyes when she started asking questions about power of attorney documents and estate planning. But I didn't, because I trusted her, because she was my sister. Because the woman who braided hair and cried in parking lots and called me every Sunday night at 8:30 to talk about nothing for 45 minutes could not possibly be the woman who was already planning how to take everything I had. And then there was the timing. Because right around the time Vivian's financial walls were closing in, right around the time she was lying awake at 3 a.m. doing math that never added up, something happened that changed everything. Hank came home one Thursday evening looking like he'd seen a ghost driving a forklift. His co-worker at the port, a man named Dave Lindgren who'd worked the engine bay next to Hank for 11 years, had been diagnosed with stomach cancer, stage 3. Dave was 51. He'd had symptoms for months. Acid reflux he blamed on the cafeteria food. Weight loss he figured was from skipping lunches. By the time he went to the doctor, it had spread. Hank sat at the kitchen table that night and didn't eat his dinner. Didn't speak. Just stared at his plate like it had betrayed him. I put my hand on his arm and he flinched. Not because he didn't want me to touch him, because he was somewhere else. Somewhere 14 years old, standing in his grandfather's kitchen, hearing those words again. She knew, and she didn't tell me. He started checking WebMD at 2 a.m. He started watching me when I ate, like he was measuring how much I left on my plate. He started asking if I was tired, not the casual way a husband asks, the monitoring way, like a man building a case file in his head. Vivian saw all of this. She saw it because she was watching. She'd been watching for months, the way a woman watches a house she's planning to break into, noting the schedules, testing the locks, waiting for the alarm to go off so she'd know exactly where the weak point was. And Hank's weak point had just lit up like a neon sign. 5 months before that Thursday night in January, our mother died. Irene Kowalski was 77 years old, COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, which is the medical system's way of saying her lungs had been fighting a slow war for years, and they'd finally surrendered. Mama went the way she lived, slowly, stubbornly, and entirely on her own terms. She spent her last afternoon sitting in her rocking chair on the cabin porch, watching the lake. My aunt told me Mama asked for a cup of coffee at 4:30, complained it was too weak at 4:35, and was gone by 5:15. Even in death, that woman had opinions about coffee. The funeral was at Bethany Lutheran, same church where Hank and I got married, same church where Vivian got married, same church where Mama had sat in the third pew from the front every Sunday for 41 years. Pastor Engstrom gave a eulogy that was mostly about the time Mama organized the church bake sale and sold so many crumb cake that the Sons of Norway Lodge across the street filed an informal complaint. That was Mama. Competitive even about cookies. I mention all of this because you need to understand what that cabin meant. It wasn't just a building. It wasn't just 5 acres of birch and pine on the shore of Lake Superior. It was the place where every good memory in our family lived. The porch where Mama knitted sweaters nobody asked for. The stone fireplace that Papa built with his own hands in 1982, every rock hauled up from the shore. The pine table where Vivian and I did homework, where Mama rolled out Lefse at Christmas, where I sat at 16 crying over a boy whose name I can't even remember now, and Mama said, "Sandra, any boy who makes you cry before dinner isn't worth the salt in your tears." The screen door that banged shut so loud you could hear it from the water. The second porch step that creaked. Always had, probably always will. That cabin smelled like cedar and wool and wood smoke, and underneath all of it, Mama, lemon soap and strong coffee and the warmth of a woman who believed she could fix anything with a hot meal and a firm opinion. Mama's will was simple. The cabin and the 5 acres went to Vivian and me, 50-50, equal shares. The property appraised at $385,000. That's $192,500 each. Not life-changing money if you're living in Manhattan, but in northern Minnesota, that's a paid-off mortgage, and then some. Within 3 weeks of the funeral, 3 weeks, while I was still finding Mama's grocery lists in my coat pockets and crying in the cereal aisle at the supermarket because she always bought the same brand of oatmeal, and there it was on the shelf like she might still need it, Vivian started pushing. She had a buyer, a friend of a friend who ran a resort development company, Northland Resort Development LLC. They wanted the cabin and the land for $240,000. Quick sale, fast cash, no hassle. That's $120,000 each. I did the math on the back of a water bill. We'd each be giving up $72,500 compared to what the property was actually worth. $72,500. That's not a rounding error. That's a kitchen renovation and a new car. We're not each throwing away $72,000, so your resort buddy can build a spa on Mama's land, Vivian, I said. We were sitting at the pine table in the cabin. Mama's knitting basket was still in the corner. Her reading glasses were still on the windowsill. The coffee in our mugs was from the same can of Folgers she'd left in the cupboard. And my sister was sitting across from me trying to sell our mother's legacy for 62 cents on the dollar before the woman's reading glasses had even collected dust. Vivian smiled. That patient, careful smile she wore when she thought someone was being unreasonable. The same smile she wore in the lab when a specimen came back contaminated. Controlled. Recalibrating. Sandy, the market could change. You don't know what's coming. The market in Two Harbors, Minnesota is not going to crash, Vivian. We're not exactly downtown Chicago. I just think we should be practical. Practical is selling at market value. Practical is not giving away $72,000 because you're in a hurry. She let it go. Or I thought she did. That's the thing about Vivian. She never let anything go. She never slammed doors or raised her voice or stormed out of a room. She just moved things to a different cabinet, one you didn't have the key to. And then she waited until you forgot there was a cabinet at all. And right around that time, right when Vivian was smiling that careful smile and filing my refusal away somewhere behind her eyes, something else happened. Something that cracked my husband wide open and gave my sister exactly the door she'd been looking for. This is where I need to stop for a second and say something I probably should have said earlier. I was not blameless in any of this. I trusted too easily. I shared too much. Every Sunday night, Vivian and I would talk on the phone for 45 minutes about nothing and everything. I told her about Hank's fears. I told her about his grandmother. I told her how he froze up when Dave Lindgren got diagnosed. I told her how he'd started watching me eat, monitoring my energy levels, asking if I was tired in that careful, measuring way. I handed my sister every weapon she ever used against me. I just didn't know they were weapons at the time. I thought they were conversations. I thought they were trust. I thought that's what sisters do. Vivian took notes, not on paper, in her head. She stored every vulnerability I ever shared like specimens in a freezer, labeled, organized, and ready to be pulled out when the time was right. The time was about to be very, very right. Here's how my sister did it, and I'm going to walk you through this slowly, because even now, even sitting here knowing everything I know, the precision of it makes my stomach turn. Not because it was brilliant. It wasn't. It was sloppy in ways that eventually brought the whole thing crashing down. But the architecture of it, the patience, the way she laid one piece on top of another like she was building a wall around my life, that part still makes my teeth hurt. 3 layers. That's what Vivian built. 3 careful, deliberate layers of lies, each one designed to support the one above it, like a house of cards held together with cruelty and my sister's very specific understanding of every person she needed to fool. Layer 1. The seed. One Sunday afternoon, about 3 months before the storm, Hank and I went to Vivian's house for dinner. She made pot roast, dry as a textbook. The kind of pot roast that makes you chew so long your jaw files, a workers' compensation claim. But That's beside the point. While I was in the bathroom, Vivian left a magazine open on the kitchen counter. Not a people magazine. Not a cooking magazine. A medical journal. The kind you don't just leave lying around unless you work in healthcare or you're trying to make a point. It was open to an article titled, "Silent Symptoms When Cancer Hides in Plain Sight." Hank saw it. Now, you need to remember what I told you about Hank. This is a man whose grandmother died of liver cancer because she hid the symptoms. This is a man whose mother survived breast cancer by the narrowest margin. This is a man who had just watched his coworker Dave Lindgren get a stage 3 stomach cancer diagnosis after months of symptoms everybody missed. Hank was already a loaded gun. That magazine was the safety clicking off. Vivian walked into the kitchen, gasped, and closed the magazine like she'd been caught with something embarrassing. "Oh, I was reading an article for work, it's nothing." It wasn't nothing. It was the first domino. And my sister had placed it on that counter as carefully as she placed specimen labels in her lab. Precise, deliberate, and designed to fall in exactly one direction. Hank didn't say anything about it that night. He didn't say anything about it for days. But I noticed the change. He started looking at me differently, not the way a husband looks at a wife. The way a mechanic looks at an engine that's making a sound it shouldn't be making. Diagnostic, searching, listening for the knock. Layer 2, the daughter. Vivian started calling Jenna. Not every day. That would have been too obvious. And Vivian was many things, but obvious was not one of them. She called maybe twice a week, just checking in. Just an aunt who cared. Just a concerned family member making casual conversation that happened to leave a trail of worry behind it, like exhaust from a tailpipe. "Your mama looks thinner, don't you think? I saw her last Tuesday and her collarbone was showing. I tried calling Sandy 3 times yesterday and she didn't pick up. Has she seemed off to you?" She forgot she already told me that story. Word for word, the exact same story. I'm probably overreacting. Forget I said anything. My sister could cry on command like a woman auditioning for a daytime medical drama. And I don't mean a good one. I mean the kind where someone comes back from the dead twice and nobody questions it. She'd add a little tremor to her voice. A tiny pause. A sniffle that sounded so genuine you'd have to be made of concrete not to feel something. Jenna started calling me, not the usual Sunday night check-in. Extra calls, midweek calls. Calls that started casual and then turned a corner so sharp you could hear the tires squeal. "Mom, how are you feeling? Like, really feeling? Have you been to the doctor lately? Just for a checkup? You would tell me if something was wrong, right? You wouldn't keep it from me?" I didn't understand where any of this was coming from. I thought maybe Jenna had been reading WebMD again. That website has convinced more healthy people they're dying than any disease in human history. Type in headache, and by the 3rd click, you're writing your will and picking out a casket color. But it wasn't WebMD. It was Vivian. Sitting in her house with the leaky roof and the $67,000 of debt, calling my daughter twice a week and feeding her fear like coins into a parking meter. Just enough to keep the anxiety running. Never enough to set off an alarm. And the thing that makes this part hurt the most is that Jenna believed her. Of course she did. Vivian was her aunt. She'd known her since birth. She'd braided Jenna's hair the same way I'd braided Vivian's. She'd babysat her, taken her for ice cream, sent her birthday cards with $20 bills tucked inside every single year. You don't question a woman like that. You don't think she's lying because why would she? What reason could she possibly have? 72,000 reasons, as it turned out. Plus the rest of mine? I found out later, much later, that Vivian had been sending Jenna Facebook messages since October. Direct messages, the kind that disappear from your notifications if you're not paying attention. Mama seemed confused on the phone today. She repeated herself 3 times and didn't notice. "I don't want to scare you, but has she mentioned any pain?" October. The first fake lab report was dated November. My sister was planting symptoms in my daughter's head a full month before she manufactured the evidence to support them. She'd started the performance before she'd even finished writing the script. And then came step 3. And this is where my jaw hit Connie's kitchen floor when I finally found out. Layer 3. The paperwork. Vivian fabricated 5 lab reports. 5. Printed on official-looking letterhead, formatted to look exactly like the lab results that come out of the clinical laboratory at Essentia Health in Duluth, which makes sense because that's exactly where the template came from. My sister didn't go looking for a fake lab report on the internet. She didn't download some template off a website. She walked into work, sat down at the computer she'd been using for 12 years, and used her own employer's proprietary lab reporting system to build medical documents for a patient who didn't exist. I was the patient who didn't exist. The report showed a comprehensive liver function panel with abnormal results across every marker: elevated ALT, elevated AST, bilirubin levels that would have had any real doctor picking up the phone immediately. There were alpha-fetoprotein tumor markers, AFP for short, which is the blood test they use to screen for liver cancer. Mine were listed as significantly elevated. And there was a referral, printed on the last page like a death sentence in Calibri 10.5 font, to an oncologist at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. The Mayo Clinic, my sister didn't just fake a local referral. She aimed for the top. If you're going to invent a cancer scare, apparently you go straight to the best hospital in the country. Credit where it's due. Vivian didn't dream small. The total billed across all 5 reports was $18,960. Consultations, blood panels, imaging, the whole catalog of tests you'd run on someone whose liver was trying to kill them. $18,960 for medical care I never received, from doctors I never met, for a disease I never had. Each report had a specimen identification number printed in the upper right corner. In a real Essentia Health Lab report, those numbers start with the prefix ESS followed by a dash and 8 digits. It's a system. It's consistent. Every specimen that moves through that lab gets tagged with that format, no exceptions. Vivian's reports had specimen numbers that were just random digits. No prefix, no format. Just numbers she apparently typed in with her eyes closed and hoped nobody would ever check. She sent the reports to Mama's P.O. box, the one on 2nd Street that Mama had kept for 30 years because she didn't trust the mail carrier after he accidentally delivered her neighbor's Victoria's Secret catalog to her house in 1997. She never forgave him. Vivian had a key to that P.O. box because she'd helped Mama with her mail during the last year of her life. Another piece of trust. Another key my sister kept after the lock was supposed to have been changed. She told Hank she found the reports in Mama's mailbox, said I must have been using Mama's P.O. box to hide the lab results from him, said she'd confronted me and I denied everything, said she was scared for me and scared for him and scared for their whole family. And Hank, my husband, the man who loved me through sandpaper and motor oil and 28 years of never saying the words, took those 5 pieces of paper that my sister printed on a billing system she operates 5 days a week, and he treated them like a verdict. His verdict. Because in Hank's mind, he wasn't looking at my lab results. He was looking at his grandmother. He was looking at Eleanor Kowalski hiding her liver cancer until it was too late. He was looking at his grandfather sitting at a kitchen table saying she knew and she didn't tell me. He was looking at the worst nightmare of his entire life, printed on 80-pound cardstock with a watermark. Okay, hold on a second before I tell you what Hank did with those lab reports. I need to pause here because someone from right here in Minnesota commented on my last story at midnight and said this channel keeps her company during her shift at the grain elevator. That one got me right in the chest. So if you haven't subscribed yet, now's your moment. Hit that button and tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is right now. I read every single one. Everyone. All right, back to this mess. Hank took those lab reports and did what Hank does. He swallowed the whole thing. He didn't come to me and say, Sandy, what are these? He didn't sit me down at the kitchen table and ask a single question. He didn't look me in the eye and say, are you sick? Are you hiding something? Talk to me. He took 5 pieces of paper and he swallowed them whole, like a man swallowing a stone, and he carried that weight in his chest for 4 days without making a sound. 4 days. 4 days of sitting across from me at dinner and not saying a word. 4 days of checking his phone at 3 in the morning. 4 days of watching me like a man watching a building he sure is about to collapse, measuring the cracks, counting the seconds, waiting for the sound. And on the 4th day, on a Thursday night in January, with the wind chill at -8 and Lake Superior howling outside like something ancient and wounded, Henry Kowalski detonated. The last thing I saw before my husband threw my boots at the front door was the clock on the stove. 11:47. Green numbers glowing in a kitchen I had cooked 9,000 meals in. Give or take a few hundred frozen pizzas. Hank had been sitting in his recliner since he got home from the port at 5:30. Silent, jaw working. Eyes locked on something I couldn't see, somewhere past the television, past the wall, past whatever it is that men stare at when they've already decided what they're going to do, and they're just waiting for the right moment to do it. I was in the kitchen putting away the dishes from dinner he hadn't eaten. Hadn't touched the chicken wild rice soup I'd made from Mama's recipe, the one with the carrots cut small the way he liked them. The bowl sat on the counter getting cold, and I remember thinking he must be coming down with something because Hank Kowalski did not skip meals. That man ate the way he worked. Steadily, thoroughly, and without complaint. Then he stood up. He walked to the kitchen counter and picked up the manila folder that had been sitting there for 3 days, the one Vivian had brought over on Monday. He held it up like it was evidence in a trial, which I suppose in his mind it was. "How long?" he said. Not a question. A detonation with a question mark stapled to the end. "How long what? How long have you been hiding this from me, Sandra?" He never called me Sandra. Not in 28 years. Not when he was angry. Not when he was scared. Not even on our wedding day when the pastor used my full name and Hank repeated it like he was reading it for the first time off a cue card. He called me Sandy. He called me Sal when he was feeling affectionate, which happened about twice a year, usually after his 3rd beer. But Sandra meant something had broken inside him that wasn't going back together. I didn't know what was in that folder. I swear on my mother's grave and her Folgers coffee and her crumb cake recipe, I did not know what my sister had put in that envelope. I reached for it, and Hank pulled it back like I was going to contaminate it. "Vivian told me everything," he said. "The tests, the results, the referral to Mayo. She told me you've been going to doctors behind my back and hiding the bills at your mother's P.O. box." The room tilted, not physically, but something inside my head shifted, like a picture frame knocked crooked on a wall. I opened my mouth to say I don't know what you're talking about, and that's when I saw her. Vivian, standing in the hallway between the living room and the kitchen, arms folded, mouth shut, wearing my reading glasses. The one she borrowed 4 months ago when she was filling out insurance paperwork at our kitchen table and said she'd left hers at home, and could she just borrow mine for a minute? That was 4 months, and 0 returned glasses ago. She stood there in my house, in my hallway, wearing my glasses, and she didn't say a single word. "Hank, I have no idea what those papers are. I never went to any doctor. I never—" "Get out." 2 words, delivered like a man closing a door he never intended to open again. "Hank, listen to me. Get out of my house. I'm not going to watch you lie to me about dying the way Grandma lied to everyone. I'm not going to sit in a chair for 7 years while you disappear and pretend everything's fine. Get out." He threw my boots at the front door. Then the manila folder. It hit the doorframe and papers slid across the floor like leaves in a wind tunnel. I looked at Vivian. I looked right at her, and I waited for her to say something. Wait. Stop. Let her explain. She's my sister. She's telling the truth. Vivian looked back at me the way you look at a clock, checking the time, noting the hour, moving on. She said nothing. I picked up my boots. I picked up the folder. I walked out the front door into -8 degrees and a wind that came off Lake Superior like it had been waiting for me personally. No coat, no phone, no keys, no wallet. Just boots, flannel pajama pants, a North Shore timber hoodie, and a manila folder full of lies that I shoved under my shirt against my stomach because something in me, some stubborn, stupid, Kowalski instinct said, "Hold on to this. You're going to need it." London Road runs along the shore of Lake Superior, heading east out of Duluth. In the summer, it's beautiful. Joggers, tourists, people walking dogs that cost more than my car. In January at midnight, it's the surface of another planet. The wind doesn't blow on London Road in winter. It attacks. It comes in off the lake horizontal, carrying ice crystals that hit your face like tiny needles, and it finds every gap in whatever you're wearing and crawls inside like it's looking for a place to sleep. I walked. 1 foot in front of the other. The snow crunching under my boots was the only sound besides the wind and my own breathing, which was getting shorter and louder and further apart. I passed houses with their lights off, driveways with cars buried under snow, recycling bins lined up at the curb like little plastic soldiers waiting for a war that had already started. After about a mile, my hands stopped hurting. That scared me more than the cold did. I knew from Hank's stories about the port that when your extremities stop hurting, it means the blood has retreated to your core. Your body is making a decision about what it can afford to save and what it's willing to lose. After a mile and a half, my legs gave out. Not all at once. They just started disagreeing with each other, like two employees who'd received different instructions and neither one was willing to ask the manager. I stumbled, caught myself on a mailbox. Stumbled again. That's when the headlights appeared behind me. Orange and white. A county plow truck, engine rumbling so deep I felt it in my chest before I saw the lights. Earl Gustafson, 63 years old. Retired teacher, working seasonal plowing because, as he told me later, sitting at home watching the History Channel was making him dumber by the hour. He cracked his window 2 inches and squinted at me through the snow. "Ma'am, you trying to freeze to death out here?" "I honestly don't have an answer for that right now, sir." He reached across and pushed the passenger door open. The heat that poured out of that truck cab hit me like a wall of mercy. I climbed in, holding that manila folder against my chest, and I shook so hard the whole truck vibrated. Earl didn't ask what happened. He didn't ask why I was walking London Road in pajamas at midnight. He just turned the heat up to full, pointed the truck toward St. Luke's, and let me sit there falling apart in his passenger seat while the vents blew warm air over my frozen hands. He saved my life. I never even got his last name right on the thank you card, wrote Gustafson with an E-N instead of an O-N. "If you're out there, Earl, I'm sorry about the spelling and I owe you more than a card." 3 days after the storm, I was sitting in Connie Bjornstad's kitchen in a borrowed Minnesota Vikings sweatshirt that was 2 sizes too big and a pair of her husband's wool socks that made me look like I was wearing small sleeping bags on my feet. I was eating dry Cheerios out of the box with my fingers like some kind of feral raccoon that had wandered indoors and decided that winter was a good enough reason to stay. Connie handed me a cup of coffee. Real coffee. Not the powdered stuff that tastes like someone described coffee to a machine and the machine shrugged and did its best. Real, dark, Norwegian strong coffee that could strip paint off a dock if you left the mug sitting long enough. "Sandy, what are we doing here?" "Dying slowly." Besides that, I laid out everything I knew. The lab reports, Vivian's story, Hank's reaction, the storm, the hospital, the heated blankets, Deputy Pelletier's clipboard, Earl Gustafson's plow truck. I put it all on Connie's kitchen table next to a stack of coupons and a ceramic rooster that had been there so long it was basically a family member. Connie listened the way she always listens, with her whole face, nodding slowly, occasionally saying, like a therapist who charges by the hour, except she does it for free and swears considerably more. The day before, Connie had driven me back to the house to pick up my car. Hank wasn't home. My boots were still on the front steps, where I'd shoved my feet into them 3 nights earlier. I grabbed my keys off the hook by the back door, got in my Subaru, and drove away without going inside. I didn't trust myself to walk into that house and not break something. Specifically, something that belonged to Hank. Specifically, something he was emotionally attached to. Specifically, his recliner. I pulled the manila folder out of my bag and spread the 5 lab reports across Connie's table. She picked one up, held it at arm's length because she refused to admit she needed reading glasses, and squinted at it like she was trying to read a parking ticket in a snowstorm. "These look like the printouts I get when they scope my knee," she said. "Same format." "I know. You think they're fake?" "I think my sister works in a clinical lab, and suddenly there are mystery lab results with my name on them that I've never seen before. I don't believe in coincidences, Connie. I barely believe in astrology." The next morning, I called Essentia Health Laboratory Services, the real one, the actual lab where my sister had worked for 12 years. I asked to speak with their records department about lab results under my name. Hold music for 4 minutes, something that sounded like a flute having an identity crisis. Then a woman with a voice so tired she might have been working since the Clinton administration told me they didn't have a Sandra Kowalski in their patient system. No blood panels. No liver function tests. No AFP tumor markers. No referrals. Nothing. My heart stopped. Then restarted. Then stopped again. I asked if she could send me something in writing, a letter, an email, anything confirming I was never their patient. She said she couldn't do that over the phone. Hospital policy. I'd need to go through their compliance office, or have an attorney submit a formal request. Dead end. I had a woman confirming the reports were fake, but she couldn't put it on paper for me. And some lady told me on the phone wasn't going to hold up anywhere except maybe at a potluck. I sat at Connie's table and stared at those lab reports until my vision blurred. 5 invoices, $18,960 worth of lies. And then, right when I was about to shove them all back in the folder and scream into one of Connie's decorative throw pillows, I saw it. The specimen identification numbers, upper right corner of each report. 5 numbers, 5 different specimens. I pulled up Connie's laptop and started searching. Essentia Health uses a standardized specimen ID format. Every sample processed through their lab gets tagged with the prefix ESS, a dash, then 8 digits. It's printed on every report, every label, every vial that moves through that system. I know this because I'd seen Connie's real lab reports from her knee surgery. ESS-8 digits. Consistent, always. Vivian's reports had specimen numbers that were just digits. No prefix, no ESS, no dash. Just random numbers that didn't match any format in any lab system I could find. My sister fabricated 5 lab reports and couldn't even bother to use the right specimen ID format. She'd gotten the font right, the layout right, the column spacing right, but she'd tripped over the one detail that you'd think a 12-year lab technician would know in her sleep. I sat there staring at those numbers and I started laughing. Not happy laughing. Not relief laughing. The kind of laughing where your body doesn't know whether to cry or scream, so it picks a third option that sounds like a malfunctioning snowblower in a garage at 2 in the morning. Connie, come look at this. She leaned over my shoulder, looked at the screen, looked at the reports, looked at the screen again. Those aren't real ID numbers. Your sister faked lab reports and used the wrong specimen format. Connie sat down hard in the chair next to me. The ceramic rooster wobbled. Vivian always did have ambition, she said, just never in the right direction. I pulled up the Essentia Health website and compared the reports side by side. The font was the same, Calibri 10.5. The field layout was the same, patient name upper left. Specimen ID upper right. Results in a 3-column table. Total in bold at the bottom right. The same faint watermark, a caduceus, that you could only see if you held the paper up to a window. Everything matched except the specimen numbers and the fact that I had never set foot in that lab as a patient. The next morning, I drove to the office of Marvin Osterberg, attorney at law on East Superior Street. His office was sandwiched between a Scandinavian bakery that sold crumcock year-round and a fishing tackle shop that had a wooden walleye mounted above the door with one glass eye missing, which felt appropriate. A lawyer's office next to a one-eyed fish. Justice is blind, and so is the walleye. Marvin was 63 years old, wore suspenders without irony, and had a handshake that could crack a walnut or a case depending on which one you put in front of him. He'd handled Mama's probate. He knew the cabin. He knew the players. And when I laid those 5 fake lab reports on his desk next to Connie's laptop showing the specimen ID format, he put on his reading glasses, leaned back in his chair, and said, "Well, that's inventive. Can you help me? I charge $1,400 flat for this kind of work. No hourly, no surprises." I had $9,800 in a savings account that Hank didn't know about. Not because I was hiding anything, because Hank never asked. In 28 years of marriage, that man never once looked at a bank statement that didn't have his name in bold at the top. I could have been funding a small fishing operation in Lake Superior, and he wouldn't have noticed as long as his direct deposit cleared. "I'll write you a check today," I said. Marvin nodded, picked up a mechanical pencil that looked older than both of us combined, and started taking notes. I walked out of his office into the cold January air, and for the first time in 5 days, I felt something I hadn't felt since before the storm. Not hope exactly. Something smaller than that. More like the space where hope might eventually fit if I could clear enough wreckage out of the way. Vivian called Connie on a Tuesday afternoon. And I need you to understand something about what happened next, because it's the part of this story that still makes me clench my jaw so hard my dentist would charge me for it. Vivian didn't call Connie to threaten her. She didn't call to interrogate her or accuse her of anything. She called her crying, full waterworks, the trembling voice. The little gasps between sentences. The tiny, barely audible sniffle that sounds like a woman trying so hard to hold herself together that the effort alone could break your heart. She told Connie she was scared, that I wasn't myself, that I was collecting papers and talking about conspiracy theories and refusing to accept what the lab results clearly showed. She said she'd tried to help me and I'd shut her out. She said she didn't know what to do anymore. She said she was afraid I was going to hurt myself or do something reckless. She said she just needed someone to talk to, someone who knew me, someone who cared. And Connie, my best friend of 19 years, the woman who once drove 40 minutes in a blizzard to bring me chicken wild rice soup when I had the flu, the woman who had sat with me in her kitchen 3 days earlier while I laid out the evidence that my sister was a liar, Connie's heart broke. For my sister. Because that's what Connie does. She feels things for people. It's her superpower and her fatal flaw. She has the emotional instincts of a Labrador retriever with a Scandinavian accent. All love, no strategy. She heard someone crying, and she responded with honesty because it did not occur to her, not for 1 second, that the crying was a performance, that the trembling voice was rehearsed, that the sniffles were as manufactured as those lab reports. Connie told Vivian that I was going through the medical documents, that I thought they were fake, that I'd found problems with the specimen identification numbers, that I'd hired a lawyer. She told her everything. Every single thing I'd shared in confidence in that kitchen next to the ceramic rooster and the coupon pile and the Norwegian coffee, Connie handed to my sister like a wrapped gift. Not out of malice. Not out of stupidity. Out of kindness. The most dangerous kind of kindness. The kind that doesn't stop to ask who it's actually serving. Vivian hung up and moved fast. Within 2 hours she called Hank. Told him I'd lost it. That I was in denial about my condition. That I was telling people the lab results were fake, said this was exactly what the medical articles described. Patients refusing to accept a diagnosis, paranoia, conspiracy thinking, told him he needed to protect himself and protect the finances before I did something drastic. By 6 o'clock that evening, Hank had changed the password on our joint bank account, the checking account where both our paychecks were deposited. 28 years of shared income locked behind a password I didn't have. He also changed our shared email password, and, I found out later, our streaming account. Every show I'd been watching, every series I was halfway through, gone behind a wall. Now, the bank account? Fine. That's financial warfare, and I can understand the logic even if I want to put his recliner through a window for it. But cutting me off from my shows? That felt unnecessarily personal. I was in the middle of a true crime series, Hank. A true crime series. You took away my ability to watch other people solve crimes while I was actively trying to solve one. That's not strategy. That's cruelty. Connie called me at 7:14 that evening. I know the time because I was standing at her stove heating up a can of Progresso minestrone soup, stirring it with a wooden spoon, and thinking about nothing in particular when the phone buzzed on the counter. Not thinking about nothing because my mind was empty. Thinking about nothing because my mind was so full that it had locked up the way a computer freezes when you open too many tabs. Sandy, I did something stupid. 4 words. 4 words, and I knew. I knew before she said another syllable. I knew the way you know a storm is coming when the air pressure drops and the birds go quiet and something in your chest tightens for a reason you can't name. She told me every word of it, what Vivian said, how she cried, how real it sounded, how Connie didn't see the trap until it was closed. She was already crying by the second sentence, harder than Vivian ever faked, because Connie's tears were real and Vivian's never were. I stood there holding that wooden spoon with steam rising off a pot of soup I was no longer hungry for. And I felt something drain out of me. Not anger, not sadness. Something bigger than both of those. Something structural. Like someone had pulled a plug at the bottom of my feet, and all the fight just leaked out onto Connie's linoleum. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the soup at the wall and watch the noodles slide down the wallpaper and feel some small satisfaction in the mess. But Connie was crying harder than I'd ever seen her cry, and one of us had to hold it together, and apparently it was going to be the one who had just lost access to her bank account, her email, and a very good true crime series. It's fine, I said. It was not fine. It was the opposite of fine. It was the antonym of fine in every language, including the ones I don't speak. But I said it because that's what you say when your best friend is sobbing in front of you and your sister is 3 moves ahead and your husband just changed every password in your shared life and you're standing in someone else's kitchen, stirring soup you can't eat with a spoon that isn't yours. I turned off the stove, I put the spoon down on the counter, I picked up my keys, and I walked out the door. I don't know why I drove to Fleet Farm. I think because it was the closest place with a big enough parking lot that I could sit in my car and nobody would look twice. People sit in Fleet Farm parking lots at all hours in Duluth doing all kinds of things. Changing wiper blades, arguing on the phone, crying in their vehicles. I've seen a man eat an entire rotisserie chicken in a pickup truck in that lot at 9 in the morning, and nobody even glanced at him. Crying in a Subaru Outback at midnight barely cracks the top 10. The lot was mostly empty. A few cars near the entrance, probably employees closing up. The yellow sodium lights buzzed overhead, throwing that sick amber glow that makes everything look like a photograph from a decade you'd rather forget. Shopping carts were lined up against the building in a long metal row, pushed together so tight they looked like they were huddling for warmth. I understood the impulse. I sat there with the engine running because it was -2 degrees, and I had already met my lifetime quota of hypothermia. My hands were on the steering wheel, the heater was blowing. The radio was off because I didn't trust whatever song came on not to break me. There are songs that find you in moments like that, songs you've heard 100 times, that suddenly mean something so specific and so devastating that they crack you open from the inside. I wasn't taking that chance. Silence was safer. I stared at those shopping carts and I thought about Minneapolis. 2.5 hours south. I-35, straight shot. I could be at Jenna's apartment by 2:30 in the morning. I could show up at her door with nothing but this car and a savings account that was now 3 figures lighter from the lawyer's fee and the clothes in Connie's guest room, and just start over. Forget the cabin. Forget Hank. Forget Vivian and her fake lab reports and her crocodile tears and her ambition that never pointed in the right direction. Forget the specimen IDs and the watermarks and the careful hands that had dismantled my life one document at a time. I could just leave. My hand was on the gear shift. I had mapped the route in my head. I-35 south to Highway 33. Merge onto 35W past Hinckley. Straight into the city. Jenna's apartment was in a neighborhood called Uptown, above a Thai restaurant that made the hallway smell like lemongrass and garlic at all hours. I could park on the street. I could buzz her apartment. She would come downstairs in her bathrobe with her hair in a bun, and she would open the door and she would hold me, and I would let someone else be strong for one night. I almost did it. My hand was on the shift. My foot was on the brake. The engine was humming and the heater was blowing and the shopping carts were standing in their row like witnesses to whatever I decided next. But then I thought about those specimen numbers. Random digits. No prefix. No ESS dash. No format. Just numbers my sister had typed in carelessly because she didn't think anyone would ever look. She'd gotten the font right. She'd gotten the layout right. She'd matched the watermark so precisely that you'd need a window and a suspicious mind to catch it. But she'd missed the one thing that mattered. The one detail that proved the whole stack was fabricated by someone who had access to the system but didn't bother to check her own work. Vivian got sloppy. She got lazy. And that sloppiness was sitting in a folder on Marvin Osterberg's desk on East Superior Street between a Scandinavian bakery and a one-eyed walleye, waiting. I sat in that parking lot for 40 minutes. I know because the dashboard clock went from 12:11 to 12:51 and I watched every single minute change like I was counting down to something I hadn't decided on yet. 40 minutes of staring at shopping carts under yellow lights and wondering if this was what giving up felt like. Not dramatic, not cinematic, no swelling music, no rain on the windshield. Just a woman sitting in a Subaru in a Fleet Farm parking lot in Duluth, Minnesota, at midnight in January, trying to decide if she had enough fight left in her for one more round. I thought about Mama, not the dying version, the living one. The one who sat on that porch and knitted sweaters and drank bad coffee and told me when I was 16 and crying over that boy whose name I can't remember, Sandra, don't you ever let someone else decide when you're done. You decide. You. Mama didn't raise quitters. She raised Kowalski women. And Kowalski women don't die in parking lots. We die on porches, watching lakes, complaining about coffee. On our own terms. I put the car in drive. But I didn't go south. I drove back to Connie's house. She was sitting at the kitchen table in her bathrobe, hands wrapped around a mug that had gone cold, eyes red, the ceramic rooster watching over her like a tiny, unhelpful guardian angel. She looked up when I walked in, and her face crumbled. I'm sorry, Sandy. I'm so sorry. I didn't see it. I didn't. I know. We're okay. Are we? Connie, you've driven me to 2 doctor's calls, 1 lawyer meeting, and 1 Fleet Farm parking lot breakdown in the last week. We're okay. She almost smiled. Almost. I need you to do something for me, I said. Anything. If Vivian calls you again, and she will, you tell her I gave up. Tell her I fell apart. Tell her I stopped looking, moved on, lost the fight. Tell her whatever she needs to hear, to believe I'm done. Connie stared at me. The mug in her hands, the rooster on the table, the coupons in their pile, the whole kitchen holding its breath. You're asking me to lie to your sister. I'm asking you to give her the same courtesy she gave me. Connie nodded, slowly, like a woman who had just been promoted from Labrador to something with sharper teeth. I went to bed that night in Connie's guest room under a quilt her grandmother made in 1968, and I stared at the ceiling and I thought about Vivian sitting in her house with the leaky roof, thinking she'd won, thinking I'd crumbled, thinking the fight had leaked out of me the way it leaked onto Connie's linoleum. She had no idea that her ex-husband had just picked up the phone. Marvin Osterberg called me on a Monday morning, 11 days after the storm. I was sitting at my desk at North Shore Timber Company, entering receiving data for a shipment of pressure-treated 4x6s, which is exactly as thrilling as it sounds. If you've ever dreamed of typing lumber dimensions into a spreadsheet while fluorescent lights hum above you like a choir of bored angels, I can tell you the reality lives up to the fantasy. My phone buzzed on the desk. Marvin's number. I picked up. Can you come in today? Is it good news or bad news? It's both. Bring coffee. It's going to be a conversation. I clocked out early, told my supervisor I had a family emergency, which was technically true if you consider your sister committing fraud and stealing your inheritance a family matter, which I suppose it is, in the most depressing possible way. Marvin had a folder on his desk that was thicker than my marriage had been in recent years. He was sitting behind it with his mechanical pencil in his hand and his reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and an expression on his face that I'd come to recognize over the past week and a half. The expression of a man who had seen a lot of things in 40 years of practicing law and was still occasionally surprised by people's capacity for creative dishonesty. "Sit down," he said. I sat. He opened the folder and pulled out a document. Legal-sized paper, dense with text, official seals, signatures at the bottom. He turned it around so I could read it and placed it flat on the desk between us. It was a power of attorney. Specifically, a durable power of attorney granting Vivian Kowalski-Drake full authority to manage, transfer, and make legal decisions regarding my share of the property at the cabin address near Two Harbors. My name was on the document as the grantor, the person giving up control. My signature was at the bottom. Except, it wasn't my signature. I had never seen that document before in my life. Marvin let me read it twice. He didn't rush me. He just sat there with his pencil and his glasses and his patience, the way a man sits with someone who is about to learn that the floor they're standing on has been removed. Vivian filed this with the county recorder's office 3 weeks ago, he said, before the storm, before any of this became public. The document gives her full authority over your share of the Kowalski estate property. My stomach dropped through Marvin's floor, through the fishing tackle shop below, through the foundation of the building and the frozen ground underneath, and kept going until it hit the bedrock beneath Lake Superior. "And there's a witness signature," he said. I already knew. I knew before he said it. I knew the way you know a punch is coming when you see the shoulder move. "Hank," I said. Marvin nodded. My husband had signed as a witness to my forged signature on a legal document that transferred $192,500 of my inheritance to my sister. Vivian had told him it was a protective measure, that if I was accumulating medical debt from the cancer treatments, creditors could place a lien on my share of the estate. She told him I'd already agreed to transfer my share into her name temporarily. For safekeeping, she told him she just needed a witness. And Hank, my husband, the man who wouldn't read a fortune cookie if it was longer than one sentence, signed on the dotted line without reading the document, without asking me, without doing one single thing that a reasonable human being would do before putting their name on a piece of paper that handed their wife's inheritance to their sister-in-law. This man who changed the oil every 3,000 miles. This man who sanded a bookshelf smooth enough to pass for glass. This man who could diagnose an engine knock from 40 feet away, but could not be bothered to read 6 paragraphs of legal text before signing away my future. I sat in that chair and felt the room tilt, not the dizzy kind. The kind where everything you thought was level turns out to have been slightly crooked the whole time, and you just never noticed because you were too busy trusting the people who built it. But that's not all, Marvin said. Those are 3 words you never want to hear from a lawyer. They rank right up there with "we need to talk" and "the IRS called." When a lawyer says, "but that's not all," you should prepare yourself emotionally the way you prepare for a Minnesota winter. Layers. Thick ones. He pulled out a second document. This one was a letter of intent, signed by Vivian Kowalski Drake on behalf of the Kowalski estate, agreeing to sell the cabin property and its 5 acres to Northland Resort Development, LLC, for $285,000. The date on the letter of intent was December 9th. The date on the power of attorney was December 16th. Vivian had signed a deal to sell Mama's cabin a full week before she had the legal authority to do so. She'd sold property she didn't own yet, using a document she hadn't forged yet. The woman had committed fraud in the wrong chronological order. She'd put the receipt before the purchase, the cart so far before the horse that the horse was still in the barn wondering what happened. She'd already sold my mother's land, I said, before she'd finished stealing it. Marvin took off his glasses, rubbed his eyes, put them back on. That's never a good sign with lawyers. When they clean their glasses, they're about to charge you more money. When they take them off entirely, they're about to ruin your week. The subpoena for the lab templates has been filed, he said. 14 days for Essentia Health to respond. I've also engaged a forensic document examiner in Minneapolis to compare the signature on the power of attorney with your known handwriting samples. Preliminary analysis should take about a week. And if it all matches, if we can prove the labs are fake and the signature is forged, then your sister is looking at criminal fraud charges, forgery charges, and possible grand larceny depending on how the county prosecutor wants to frame it. Plus, she'll almost certainly lose her job. I drove home from Marvin's office the long way, past the harbor, past the lift bridge, past the grain elevators that line the waterfront like concrete giants guarding something nobody remembers anymore. And then I turned north on Highway 61 and drove to Mama's cabin. I parked on the gravel drive, the crunch under my tires that used to sound like an announcement. Like the cabin knew I was coming and wanted to say hello. But this time, there was something else in the driveway. Orange survey stakes, driven into the frozen ground at regular intervals across the property. On Mama's land, on the 5 acres of birch and pine where I caught fireflies and swam in water cold enough to ache. Stakes marking boundaries for someone else's blueprint, someone else's resort, someone else's future built on ground that still smelled like cedar and wool and my mother. I sat in my car and stared at those orange stakes sticking out of Mama's land like accusations, and then my phone rang. Jenna. Mom, I need to talk to you. Jenna's voice had that quality to it, the tight, held-together sound that people make when they've been crying for a while and they've stopped but they haven't recovered. Like a string that's been pulled so taut it's vibrating. One more turn and it snaps. I was still sitting in my car in front of the cabin, staring at those orange stakes, and for a second I thought she was calling because something had happened to her. Because that's where my mind went first. Not to Vivian, not to the case, to my daughter. Because no matter how many forged documents and fake lab reports and stolen inheritances are piling up around you, when your child calls and her voice sounds like that, everything else disappears. What's wrong? Are you okay? I'm fine, Mom. I'm fine, but I've been going through my phone, my messages, the ones from Aunt Viv. She'd been sitting in her apartment in Minneapolis, the one in Uptown above the Thai restaurant, scrolling through months of Facebook messages from Vivian, direct messages. The kind that slide into your inbox quietly, like someone slipping a note under a door. And she'd been reading them with new eyes. Mom, the earliest message I can find is from October 14th. October 14th. I let that land. The first fake lab report was dated November 3rd. Vivian had been texting my daughter about my symptoms, my confusion, my memory problems, my weight loss, a full 3 weeks before the first fabricated blood panel existed. She'd been describing a disease to my daughter that she hadn't even manufactured the evidence for yet. She said you seemed confused on the phone, Jenna continued, her voice cracking at the edges like ice on a puddle in March. She said you repeated yourself 3 times and didn't notice. She said you forgot you'd already told her about Connie's knee surgery. She said she didn't want to scare me, but had I noticed anything? I closed my eyes. I leaned my head back against the headrest and I listened to my daughter read me the text messages my sister had used to turn her against me, one carefully worded line at a time. October 21st. Mama looked thin today, really thin. Her collarbone was showing through her sweater. I asked if she was eating and she changed the subject. October 29th. I don't want to alarm you, but I think your mom might be in denial about something. She got confused about what day it was when I called her. She thought it was Tuesday. It was Thursday, November 1st. I'm scared, Jenna. I really am. I think something is wrong and she won't admit it. Please don't tell her I said anything. I don't want her to feel ganged up on. November 1st, 2 days before the first lab report. 2 days before the first fake specimen ID and the first fabricated AFP tumor marker and the referral to an oncologist at the Mayo Clinic for a disease that didn't exist. My sister had been warning my daughter about symptoms of a cancer that hadn't been invented yet. She'd planted the garden before she'd bought the seeds. She'd written the review before she'd seen the movie. She'd started the performance before she'd finished writing the script, and she'd used my daughter as the audience. Jenna was crying. Not the loud kind. The quiet kind that's worse. The kind where someone is trying so hard not to fall apart that the effort itself becomes the thing that breaks them. Mom, I'm so sorry. I believed her. I believed every word. She's my aunt. She braided my hair. She sent me birthday cards. I didn't think she could. I didn't. Jenna, stop. This is not your fault. I should have asked you. I should have just asked you directly instead of calling with those weird questions. Honey, she's your aunt. You've known her your whole life. She was supposed to be someone you could trust. That's what made it work. That's always what makes it work. The lie works because the person telling it is someone you'd never suspect of lying. Silence on the phone. The kind that has weight to it. Like 2 people holding the same heavy thing from opposite ends and neither one ready to set it down. What do you need me to do? Jenna asked. I need you to screenshot every message she sent you. Every single one. With the dates showing. And I need you to write a sworn statement for my attorney. A written account of everything Vivian told you, when she told you, and what she asked you to do. Done. I'll have it by tomorrow. You don't have to rush. Mom. Done. Tomorrow. And I'm coming home this weekend. Jenna, you don't have to. I'm coming home. I sat in my car in front of Mama's cabin with the orange stakes in the ground and the birch trees bare against the gray sky and the lake somewhere beyond the tree line. Frozen and silent the way only Superior knows how to be silent. Like it's holding something enormous and cold and ancient and choosing not to speak. And I cried. But for the first time in weeks, they weren't the bad kind of tears. They were the kind that come when somebody finally believes you. When somebody looks at the mess and doesn't ask if you're sure, doesn't tilt their head and say, but are you certain, doesn't wonder out loud if maybe you're overreacting. When somebody just says, what do you need me to do? And means it. 2 days later, Marvin called again. This time he had someone on the line with him. Glenn Drake, Vivian's ex-husband, the man who'd gone out for milk 3 years ago and come back with a divorce attorney. Glenn had reached out to Marvin through a mutual contact, a family law attorney in Terre Haute who'd handled Glenn's side of the divorce. He'd heard through that attorney that Vivian was under investigation for fraud, and he wanted to talk. What Glenn told Marvin, and what Marvin relayed to me that afternoon in his office, with the walleye and the bakery and the pencil, was this. During their marriage, Vivian had systematically redirected household bills to a P.O. box Glenn didn't know about. She'd opened 3 credit cards in his name without his knowledge. She'd forged his signature on 2 home equity line applications. She'd intercepted bank statements and replaced them with modified versions that didn't show certain withdrawals. Glenn had only discovered it during the divorce, when his attorney ordered a full financial audit. By then, the damage was done. He hadn't pressed criminal charges because his lawyer advised that the cost of litigation would exceed what he'd recover, and because Glenn, in his own words relayed through Marvin, was too tired and too broke to fight a woman who fights like that. But he was willing to provide a sworn statement, detailing the pattern, detailing the methods, detailing the fact that my sister didn't just become a fraud artist when Mama died. She'd been one for years. She'd practiced on her husband before she came for me. My sister wasn't just a liar, I said to Marvin, staring at Glenn's statement on his desk. She was a professional. Marvin filed the subpoena that afternoon. 14 days for Essentia Health's legal department to respond. 2 weeks of waiting while Vivian walked around thinking she'd gotten away with it. While orange survey stakes stood on Mama's land, like little orange tombstones marking the grave of something that wasn't dead yet. 16 days after Marvin filed the subpoena, the response arrived. A manila envelope from the legal department of Essentia Health. Not the slim kind, the thick kind. The kind that makes a sound when it hits a desk because there's enough paper inside to change somebody's life. Marvin called me at 8:41 in the morning. I was in my car in the parking lot at North Shore Timber, 15 minutes early for my shift, eating a granola bar that tasted like compressed sawdust with raisins. He said 3 words. "We've got her." I put the granola bar down. I don't think I ever picked it back up. For all I know, it's still sitting on my passenger seat, fossilizing into something archaeologists will find in 1,000 years and assume was currency. I drove straight to his office. Didn't clock in. Didn't call my supervisor. Just turned the key, pulled out of the lot, and drove to East Superior Street like a woman who had been waiting 16 days for a door to open and just heard the lock click. Marvin had the envelope open on his desk. The documents were spread out in 2 rows. On the left, Vivian's fake lab reports, the 5 I'd been carrying in that manila folder since the night of the storm. On the right, the official lab reporting templates from Essentia Health's clinical laboratory, the real ones. The ones that came with a cover letter from their legal department and a compliance stamp, and the weight of institutional truth. He didn't say anything at first. He just gestured at the 2 rows and let me look. The templates were a match. Not similar, not close, not in the same ballpark, identical. Same font, Calibri, 10.5, same field layout. Patient name upper left, date of service directly below, ordering physician on the right. Specimen identification number in a bordered box, upper right corner. Results displayed in a 3-column table. Test name, result, reference range. Total charges in bold at the bottom right. And the same watermark. A faint caduceus, the medical symbol with the 2 snakes in the wings, printed so lightly into the paper that you could only see it if you held the page up to a window or tilted it under a lamp. Every element matched. Every column, every border, every margin, down to the millimeter. The only differences were the department name, which Vivian had changed from Essentia Health Clinical Laboratory to something she invented called Lake Superior Oncology and Diagnostics, the name of the ordering physician, which she'd listed as a Dr. R. Nygaard, who did not exist in any medical database Marvin could find, and the specimen identification numbers, which were random digits with no prefix, no format, and no connection to any sample ever processed in any lab anywhere. Vivian had taken her own employer's proprietary lab reporting system, the system she'd used 5 days a week for 12 years, changed the names, scrambled the numbers, and apparently called it a day. She'd committed fraud the way some people parallel park in Duluth in January, overconfident, sloppy, and without checking the mirrors. Marvin also had my complete medical record from Dr. Linda Ostrowski, my family physician for the past 13 years. 13 years of annual checkups, blood panels, flu shots, and one memorable visit in 2020 when I went in, convinced I had a thyroid condition, and it turned out I was just drinking too much coffee. 13 years of documentation that showed exactly 0 neurological referrals, 0 oncology consultations, 0 liver function abnormalities, and 0 AFP tumor markers of any kind. The closest thing to a concerning note in my entire file was from 2019. It read, "Patient reports occasional headaches, likely tension-related, advised ibuprofen and reduced screen time." 13 years of clean records versus 5 lab reports printed on stolen stationery from a woman who invented a doctor named Nygaard and didn't think anyone would Google him. And then there was the handwriting analysis. Marvin had engaged a forensic document examiner in Minneapolis, a man named Arthur Calloway, who had been analyzing questioned documents for 31 years and had testified in over 200 cases. Marvin handed me Calloway's preliminary report, 4 pages long, written in the kind of precise, clinical language that turns handwriting into evidence and suspicion into fact. The signature on the power of attorney was, in Calloway's professional opinion, not consistent with my known handwriting samples. He cited 4 specific inconsistencies. First, the pen pressure was heavier than my natural writing, suggesting deliberate effort rather than automatic movement. Second, the formation of the capital S in Sandra showed a loop pattern that did not appear in any of my authenticated signatures. Third, the overall slant of the writing leaned further left than my natural hand. And fourth, the baseline, the invisible line the letters sit on, wavered in a pattern consistent with someone watching a model and attempting to reproduce it, rather than writing from muscle memory. His conclusion was one word: simulation. Someone had copied my signature from another document, probably one of the probate papers Vivian had access to from Mama's estate. She'd traced my name and apparently thought that was good enough. Those careful hands of hers, the ones that could label blood vials and fold letters into perfect thirds, had forged my signature with enough skill to fool a county clerk, but not enough to fool a man who'd spent 3 decades staring at ink under a magnifying glass. Marvin laid it all out on his desk, the fake lab reports on the left, the real templates in the center, the Google search confirming Dr. R. Nygaard didn't exist. My 13 years of clean medical records, Calloway's handwriting analysis, the power of attorney with my forged signature, the letter of intent dated a week before the forgery, Jenna's affidavit, 14 pages of screenshots, every Facebook message timestamped starting October 14th, and Glenn Drake's sworn statement detailing 3 years of financial manipulation during his marriage to Vivian. It looked like a timeline of betrayal laid out on a conference table, and it was the saddest thing I'd ever seen on a desk. And I've sat through 19 years of quarterly timber inventory reviews at North Shore, so my threshold for sad desk content is higher than most. Marvin arranged the meeting for Thursday at 10 in the morning. He invited 3 people: me, Hank, and Vivian. He told Hank it was a mediation session regarding the Kowalski estate. He told Vivian the same thing. Neither of them knew what was in that folder. I didn't sleep the night before. Not from anxiety, from something else. Something that lived in the space between adrenaline and grief. Because I knew that whatever happened in that room, whatever Marvin said and whatever Vivian did when she heard it, I was about to lose my sister forever. Not the sister she'd become. That sister was already gone. She'd been gone since the day she opened that billing system and typed my name into a template designed for real patients with real diseases. The sister I was about to lose was the other one, the one who stole my hair ties and blamed the cat, the one I taught to ride a bike on the gravel road near the cabin, the one who cried in the courthouse parking lot because she couldn't find her keys, and I held her hand and told her she'd be okay. That sister was already dead, but on Thursday morning I was going to bury her. I got to Marvin's office at 9:40, 20 minutes early. I sat in my car for 10 of those minutes, with the engine off and the cold creeping in through the windows like an uninvited guest that knew exactly where the gaps were. I stared at the door to the building, the one between the bakery and the tackle shop, and I tried to remember the last time I was this nervous about walking through a door. My wedding, Bethany Lutheran, June of 1996. I'd stood outside those church doors in a dress my mother had hemmed 3 times because I kept losing weight from the stress of planning a potluck reception, and I'd thought to myself, whatever happens in there, your life is about to change. This felt the same. Except instead of a dress, I was wearing my work khakis, and instead of a groom, I was about to face my sister across a table covered in evidence of her crimes. I went inside. Marvin had everything laid out on the conference table, like exhibits at a trial. 2 rows, neat and precise, each document in its own space, with its own label. It looked like the saddest museum exhibit in the history of Duluth, and that's saying something because we have a museum dedicated entirely to shipwrecks. On the left side of the table, the 5 fake lab reports. In the center, the Essentia Health templates, the Google search results for Dr. R. Nygaard and Arthur Calloway's forensic analysis. On the right, my medical records from Dr. Ostrowski, the power of attorney, the letter of intent, Jenna's 14-page affidavit, and Glenn Drake's sworn statement. 8 pieces of evidence. 7 months of lies. 1 conference table. Marvin was already seated at the head, mechanical pencil in hand, reading glasses on, looking like a man who had choreographed this meeting down to the minute and was waiting for the curtain to rise. On the wall behind him hung a clock with a walleye fish painted on its face. The fish had one glass eye and one painted eye, and it stared out at the room with the lopsided confidence of something that had been mounted on a wall in 1983 and never once questioned its place there. Hank arrived first, 9:58. He walked in wearing his Carhartt jacket and his work boots, and the expression of a man who had been told to show up for a meeting he didn't understand about an estate he wished didn't exist. He sat down in the chair nearest the door, the way people sit when they want to be closest to the exit, and he saw the papers on the table and immediately looked confused. Not the dramatic kind of confused. The Hank kind. The kind where his eyebrows moved half an inch closer together and his jaw shifted slightly to the left, and you could tell he was trying to process information without asking any questions, because asking questions would mean admitting he didn't know something. And Hank would rather eat a wasp than admit that. He looked like a man who had just realized the furniture in his house had been rearranged while he was at work, and he wasn't sure where to sit anymore. Vivian walked in at 10:06, 6 minutes late. She was wearing a blue cardigan buttoned to the throat and carrying a leather portfolio under her arm that I recognized immediately because it was Mama's. Dark brown leather, brass zipper, a small coffee stain on the lower left corner from 1991 when Mama spilled while reviewing her tax documents. Vivian had taken it from the cabin. Of course she had. She'd taken everything else. She smiled at Marvin. Polite. Professional. The careful smile. She smiled at me. Warmer. Concerned. The sister. Smile. The one that said I'm here for you even though I'm the reason we're all here. She did not smile at Hank, which told me she was still playing the role of the worried sister who did this for the family's own good. Marvin waited until everyone was seated. He let the silence settle away. A conductor lets the hall go quiet before the first note. Then he began. He placed his hand on the 5 lab reports and slid them to the center of the table. Vivian, do you recognize these documents? She glanced at them the way you glance at something you've already decided isn't a threat. Those are Sandy's lab results, she said. I found them in our mother's P.O. box. I brought them to Hank because I was concerned about my sister's health. Marvin nodded. He didn't argue. He didn't challenge. He just nodded the way a man nods when he's giving someone enough rope. He placed the specimen ID analysis next to the reports, a single sheet with the Essentia Health format printed at the top, ESS-8 digits, and Vivian's 5 random numbers printed below. He explained calmly that the specimen identification numbers on the lab reports did not conform to any format used by any clinical laboratory in the state of Minnesota. They were not Essentia numbers. They were not Mayo numbers. They were not numbers from any lab in any database his office had searched. Vivian's smile flickered. Just a fraction, like a light bulb that receives a surge and recovers before anyone notices. Almost. Marvin placed the Essentia Health templates next to the fake reports, side by side. He didn't need to explain. The visual did the work. Same font, same layout, same columns, same watermark. 2 documents that looked like identical twins who'd been separated at birth and given different names. The lab reports submitted to your brother-in-law were generated using the proprietary reporting template of Essentia Health's clinical laboratory, Marvin said. The font, field layout, column spacing, and watermark are a forensic match. The only modifications are the department name and the specimen identification numbers. Vivian opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Her face did something I'd never seen before. It tried to arrange itself into 3 different expressions at once: surprise, confusion, and innocence, and it landed on none of them. She looked like a woman trying to parallel park 3 emotions into a space built for one. That can't be right, she said. Those came from a real clinic. I found them in the mailbox. Marvin didn't respond to that. He simply slid the power of attorney to the center of the table. He explained that this document, filed with the county recorder's office on December 16th, transferred Sandra Kowalski's inherited share of the property to Vivian Kowalski-Drake. He explained that the signature attributed to Sandra had been examined by Arthur Calloway, a forensic document examiner with 31 years of experience. He explained that Calloway had identified 4 specific inconsistencies between the signature on the document and Sandra's known handwriting samples: pen pressure, letter formation on the capital S, slant, baseline stability. He used the word simulation. He let it hang in the air like smoke. Then he looked at Hank. "And you, Mr. Kowalski, signed as a witness to this document." Hank looked at the power of attorney, then at Vivian, then at the power of attorney. I watched the realization land on him, the way I'd been watching things land on Hank for 28 years. Slowly, like a glass falling off a table in slow motion. You can see it going, you can see the angle, you can see the exact moment when it passes the point where someone could catch it, and then it hits. "You told me Sandy already agreed," Hank said quietly. So quietly the walleye clock ticked louder than his voice. Vivian said nothing. "You told me she signed it. You told me she wanted her share protected. You told me she agreed, Vivian." Silence. "You told me she agreed, Vivian." I need a second here. Because this part, sitting in that office, watching my sister's face, when she realized she'd been caught with her own paperwork, her own templates, her own careful hands turned into evidence against her, I still can't talk about it without my voice doing something I can't control. Not cracking from sadness, not trembling from satisfaction, something else. Something that doesn't have a name in any language I know. The feeling you get when someone you loved with your whole chest proves they never deserved it, and you have to sit there across a conference table and watch them prove it in real time, one document at a time, while a walleye clock ticks on the wall like it's counting down the last seconds of something that used to be a family. Marvin let the silence hold after Hank's outburst. He let it sit in the room the way a good attorney lets silence do the work that words can't. Vivian was staring at the table. Hank was staring at Vivian. I was staring at both of them and feeling something drain out of my chest that I don't think is ever coming back. Then Marvin placed the letter of intent on the table. He explained calmly, in that measured voice of his that sounded like a man reading a weather forecast for a storm that had already hit, that Vivian had signed a letter of intent with Northland Resort Development LLC to sell the cabin property and its 5 acres for $285,000. He read the date aloud. December 9th. Then he pointed to the power of attorney. December 16th. "You signed a binding letter of intent to sell property you did not yet have legal authority to sell," Marvin said. "You executed the agreement 7 days before the power of attorney was even filed. 7 days before the forged document gave you the appearance of authority." He let that sit. "That's not just fraud, Miss Drake. That's premeditation. That's a paper trail showing that you had already arranged the sale of your sister's inheritance before you had finished manufacturing the legal mechanism to steal it." Vivian didn't move. Her hands were flat on the table, those careful hands, and they were perfectly still, but her jaw was working, the same way Hank's jaw works. The same way everyone's jaw works when their mouth wants to say something and their brain is screaming at it to stop. Marvin placed Jenna's affidavit on the table. He explained that it was a sworn statement from Vivian's niece, 14 pages, every Facebook message, time-stamped, starting October 14th. He read the first one aloud. Mama seemed confused on the phone today. She repeated herself 3 times and didn't notice. Dated 3 weeks before the first fabricated lab report on November 3rd. "You expressed concern about your sister's cognitive health," Marvin said, "before the medical evidence supporting that concern existed, because you created that evidence after the fact." Then Glenn Drake's sworn statement. Marvin didn't read the whole thing. He summarized. During her marriage, Vivian had redirected household bills to a P.O. box her husband didn't know about. She had opened credit cards in his name. She had forged his signature on home equity line applications. She had intercepted bank statements and replaced them with modified versions. This statement establishes a documented pattern of financial fraud predating the current matter by at least 3 years, Marvin said. He said it the way you'd say the sky is blue or the lake is cold. Just a fact. Just a pattern. Just a woman who had been doing this for years and finally ran into someone with a mechanical pencil and a subpoena. Vivian's eyes were wet. But they weren't sorry wet, they were caught wet. There's a difference, and once you know it, you can never unsee it. Sorry looks down. Sorry looks at the hands that did the damage. Sorry sits with the weight of it. Caught looks around for an exit. Caught measures the distance to the door. Caught calculates what can still be salvaged. My sister was looking for the exit. "You don't know what it's like," she whispered. Her voice was small, the smallest I'd ever heard it. Smaller than the voice she used when Glenn left. Smaller than the voice she used at Mama's funeral. You don't know what I've been through. Glenn left me with nothing. The mortgage, the roof, the credit cards. I was drowning, Sandy. I was drowning and nobody was throwing me a rope. I sat there and I looked at my sister, my baby sister, the girl I braided hair for, the girl I taught to drive, the girl who stole my hair ties and blamed the cat and called me every Sunday at 8:30 to talk about nothing for 45 minutes. And I wanted, God help me, I wanted to feel something for her. Some flicker of the love that used to live in my chest like a furnace. Some trace of the blind, stupid trust that had made me hand her every weapon she ever used. But I looked at her and all I saw was a woman wearing Mama's leather portfolio, sitting at a table covered in documents she created to steal Mama's cabin, crying tears that were wet but not sorry. Marvin told her he was prepared to file a criminal fraud complaint with the St. Louis County Prosecutor's Office, including forgery charges for the signature on the power of attorney. He was also prepared to contact Essentia Health regarding the misuse of their proprietary lab reporting system, which would likely result in immediate termination and possible civil liability. Or, he said, they could resolve this. Today, in this room. Vivian looked at me. For the first time in months, she actually looked at me. Not at the version of me she'd been selling to everyone, the confused, sick, declining woman who couldn't be trusted with her own inheritance. She looked at the woman sitting across from her with a folder full of her own lies and a lawyer who had just laid her life on a table like an autopsy. What do you want? She said. I'd been thinking about this moment for weeks. In Connie's guest room under the 1968 quilt, in the Fleet Farm parking lot at midnight. In my car in front of the cabin with the orange stakes, I'd rehearsed it, revised it, shortened it. I didn't want a speech. I didn't want revenge. I wanted 3 things. And I wanted them before I walked out of that room. I want the power of attorney voided. I want your share of Mama's cabin signed over to me as compensation for what you've done. And I want your written admission that the lab reports were fabricated and the signature was forged. Today, in this room, before I leave this chair, or Marvin makes those calls. She stared at me. I stared back. The walleye stared at both of us with its one good eye. Vivian signed everything. Took her 14 minutes. I know because I watched every single one of them tick by on that walleye clock, the one that looked like it came from a bait shop in 1983 and had probably witnessed more confessions than a church. 14 minutes to void the power of attorney. 14 minutes to sign over her share of a $385,000 property. 14 minutes to write and sign a statement, admitting she fabricated 5 lab reports using her employer's system and forged my signature on a legal document. 14 minutes to undo 7 months of lies. Hank sat through the whole thing without saying another word. When it was over, he stood up, put his hands in his jacket pockets, and walked out of the office, like a man who had just discovered that the foundation of his house had been hollow the whole time, and he'd been standing on air for months. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at Vivian. He looked at the floor, and he walked out. And the door closed behind him with a click that sounded like the period at the end of a very long sentence. And then it was over. Almost. Because I still had 2 conversations left, one on a sidewalk and one in a parking lot. Connie was waiting on the sidewalk outside Marvin's office. She'd been sitting on a bench next to a fire hydrant for 45 minutes in 12-degree weather with nothing but her parka and a cup of coffee from the bakery next door that had gone cold half an hour ago. I told her that was irresponsible given that she'd watched me nearly die of hypothermia 4 weeks earlier and should absolutely know better. How'd it go? Vivian signed. Connie grabbed me and hugged me so hard, my spine made a sound I'd never heard before, something between a crack and a pop, like a joint that had been holding tension for 7 months and finally let go. She held on a long time. The kind of hug that's trying to say 12 different things because the mouth doesn't know where to start. I'm sorry, she said into my coat, for talking to her, for believing her, for all of it. I know. We're okay. Are we? Connie, you've driven me to 3 doctor's calls, 2 lawyer meetings, and 1 Fleet Farm parking lot breakdown in the last month. We're okay. She laughed. A small one. The kind that leaks out when you're not sure you're allowed to laugh yet, but your body does it anyway, because it needs to release something. Hank was standing by his truck in the parking lot across the street. He was leaning against the driver's side door with his hands in his pockets and something behind his eyes that had collapsed. He wasn't smaller physically, still built like a diesel engine. But some beam that had been holding the framework upright had buckled, and what was left was a man leaning against a truck because he wasn't sure his legs would do the job alone. I walked across the street, stopped 10 feet away. "Sandy, I didn't know. You threw my boots at the door, Hank, in -8 degrees, while I was wearing pajama pants and a hoodie. You didn't ask me one question, not one. You took 5 pieces of paper that my sister printed on a system she uses to process blood samples, and you treated them like a death sentence. Not mine, yours. Because you weren't thinking about me. You were thinking about your grandmother. You were thinking about your father. You were thinking about yourself." The wind came off the lake between us like a third person in the conversation. "You changed the bank passwords. You changed the email. You changed the streaming. You locked me out of everything we built together because a woman who can't even fabricate a specimen ID number correctly told you I was dying. And instead of looking me in the eye and asking if it was true, you chose to believe her, because believing her was easier than sitting with the fear." Hank didn't say anything. His jaw worked the way it always works, like a man chewing on words he couldn't swallow. I didn't wait for him to figure it out. I got in my Subaru and turned north. Highway 61 follows the shore of Lake Superior, heading out of Duluth toward Two Harbors. In February, the lake was still frozen near shore, great sheets of white and gray stretching out like the earth had tried to reach the horizon and given up halfway. But further out, where the ice met open water, I could see cracks, dark lines running through the white-like veins. The ice was breaking, not all at once, just quietly, the way things break when they've been holding too long and the season underneath has already changed. The light was different too. February light in Minnesota doesn't look like winter anymore, but doesn't look like spring either. Something in between, a promise that hasn't been kept yet but is thinking about it. I turned onto the gravel road, the crunch under my tires, birch trees bare and white against the gray sky, like bones standing upright. And there was the cabin, cedar walls, stone chimney. The porch where Mama sat every evening with her knitting needles and her opinions about coffee. The orange survey stakes were gone. Marvin had taken care of that. The driveway was just a driveway again. I walked up the 3 porch steps. The second one creaked. Always has. Probably always will. Turned the key. Pushed the door open. The stone fireplace Papa built in 1982, every rock hauled from the shore. The pine table where Vivian and I did homework, where Mama rolled out lefse at Christmas, where I sat 3 months ago drinking coffee and telling my sister everything about my life while she planned how to take it. Mama's knitting basket in the corner. Her reading glasses on the windowsill. The smell of cedar and wool and wood smoke, and underneath it all, Mama, lemon soap and strong coffee, and the warmth of a woman who believed every problem could be fixed with a good meal and a firm opinion. I sat down at that table, put my keys on the wood, the same wood that held 40 years of our family's weight. Homework and holidays and left-stow and jigsaw puzzles on rainy afternoons, and the kind of love that doesn't announce itself but is always there, like the smell of cedar in a room you've known your whole life. My keys, my table, my cabin. I walked to the porch and sat on the step that doesn't creak. Lake Superior stretched to the horizon, vast and patient, the way only something that old knows how to be. The ice was cracking. I could hear it. Not loud. A whisper. The lake letting go of what it had been holding all winter. Spring was coming. Not here yet, but coming. The way good things come after hard seasons. Not on your schedule, but faithfully. The way God brings morning after the longest nights. The way He puts people in your path when the road is darkest. A plow truck driver at midnight, a friend with cold coffee on a bench, a daughter who says I'm coming home and means it. The way He sits down next to you on a porch in February and doesn't say a word. Just lets you rest, lets you feel the season turning. Lets you know, in the quiet way only He can, that the worst of it is over and what comes next is yours. I used to think strength meant holding on, holding the marriage, the sister, the trust, the belief that love is a contract both people signed. But maybe strength is knowing when to let go, knowing the ice has to crack for the water to move, knowing that the door you're supposed to walk through might be the one you've had the key to all along. My mother's lake, my family's land. Thank you for staying with me through this one. I mean that from the bottom of my heart. If this story reached something inside you, if it reminded you that truth has a way of finding daylight no matter how deep someone buries it, share it with someone who needs to hear that today. Leave me a comment and tell me what this meant to you. I read every single one. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's your moment. There are more stories waiting. I'll see you in the next one.